Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I'm just in my car heading off to the Greece press conference later. But I thought I'd do a quick video because we spoke to Dominic Solanke yesterday on England duty, back in the England frame. And obviously being Tottenham's record signing and the most expensive player as well, signed by a Premier League club in the summer, I thought it'd be fitting to do a little video on my thoughts on what he said and the things that he said, and as well as that, for a feature for the paper, which went in today's paper on Wednesday, I did a piece with his old teammate Simon Francis at Bournemouth, who was captain when Solanke first signed, and then became technical director of the club, which he still is now, by the time that Solanke was sold to Tottenham for 65 million. So probably knows Solanke and his journey better than most people. So a few thoughts on that piece as well, and some of the interesting things that Simon told me about Dom, which can hopefully get a bit more of an insight into the kind of character that Spurs have signed, and why he seems like a very good signing for Spurs. But back to Solanke's press conference. So first of all, it's been almost 7 years since his last cap, which is a heck of a long time for England. If he does play against Greece on Thursday, it'll have been 6 years and 332 days since his last cap, his one and only cap so far. That would make him fifth on the all-time list of longest gaps between first and second caps in the post-war era. Fourth on the list, a certain Mr. Ian Walker of Spurs. So you can tell, how long it's been since his last cap, which came against Brazil back in November 2017, a 0-0 draw at Wembley, one of the early sort of fixtures under Gareth Southgate. The fact that Ryan Bertrand, Joe Hart, Jake Livermore, Eric Dyer playing midfield, Jamie Vardy up front, were all starting that game sort of sums up how long ago that was, that fixture. Solanke came on in the 75th minute and actually had quite a good chance towards the end of it. But it's obviously been a long road since, a long journey, which during his press conference he reiterated how everyone's journey's different, as we well know, and how he wouldn't have it any other way. He framed that shirt from his first game, and has had it up in his house ever since, or pride of place, which you can totally understand. I mean, it's the finest achievement for a lot of players that they can have playing for their country. But you would not be surprised that over the years maybe there might be almost frustration looking at that shirt, just the fact that he hasn't been able to add to it. But far from it, he was talking about how much he always believed that he would be more than a one cap wonder, I suppose, and add to it, and how it just constantly provided him motivation. And again, as proud as anything to have that cap and that shirt up in his house. He did talk about Tottenham a bit, which I'll sort of focus more on because this is obviously more of a Spurs channel rather than England. And he mentioned that he was obviously frustrated to get an early injury, given he barely had any injuries at Bournemouth, and that was a big part of his how attractive it was to sign him, is how available he is all the time. But that he feels good now, feels in the groove. He praised Ange Postecoglou as a great manager, as someone whose style really fits his. I mean, it's all the things we talked about, but it's just interesting to hear it from Solanke himself, talking about how the pressing style, the way of playing, and you can see that already from particularly from the pressing. It's been a huge part of Spurs' game so far this season, and also how he can drop in, which we saw brilliantly against Brighton the first half. I know Brighton is still a real sore spot for Spurs fans. Just so frustrating what happened there. But if you're focusing on the positives, in that first half, I thought Solanke in particular was brilliant. He played that ball through for Johnson to open the scoring. So, talking about how much of a fit it was. He was asked about this supposed 180-minute crisis that Ange referred to when he hadn't scored in his first 2 games, and he just sort of branded it quite silly, and doesn't bother him at all. He feels like he's improving every day. Already feels like he's kicked on as a player since going to Tottenham. and he was describing how the sort of how it came about when he got his call up from Lee Carsley, who he knows from the under-21s. I think Lee was assistant to AD Boothroyd when Solanke was back in the 21s. Remember, Solanke's got this rich history of England youth football. I mean, he won the under-17 Euros back in 2014, and even more significantly, when he won the under-20 World Cup in 2017, he was given the Golden Ball. He was the best team, voted the tournament's best player. So he's on a really interesting journey, coming from this sort of boy wonder, who then went to obviously left Chelsea for Liverpool, struggled under pressure there, made the move to Bournemouth, had scored one Premier League goal by the time he signed for 19 million for Bournemouth, where a lot of eyebrows were raised at that fee at that time. Struggled initially there, couldn't sort of prevent the team from getting relegated, went down to the Championship and really found his feet. And I asked him specifically about that relegation, and was it essentially key to where he is now? And he agreed. It's played a massive part. That's where he grew his confidence. That's where he became the main man at Bournemouth. Played every week, really honed his craft, scored goals for fun, particularly in his second season in the Championship, where he got Bournemouth promoted, and then got back into the Premier League, established himself, and then really kicked on under Andoni Iraola, as we know, scoring those 19 goals in the Premier League last season, which led to his move to Spurs. He said, actually, on the back of that, I think some people were suggesting that he should have even gone to the Euros or been included in that squad. Obviously the competition was fierce, but I suppose with even Tony, who I think, to be fair, justified his selection throughout that tournament with his cameo appearances, but the fact that he'd been suspended and hadn't scored basically since he scored for England in March. By the time he got to the Euros, some would have suggested that Solanke could have been involved instead, and he did say he was disappointed by missing out, and really felt, but used it as motivation to fuel him to where he is now, which sort of underlines kind of what I'm going to mention from Simon Francis's comments about his character. I asked about his fitness, because the fact that he seems to be always fit to play games generally, apart from ironically those first couple of games. And this incredible athleticism to be such a great presser of up front, the best pressing centre forward in the league last season. He said there was no secret. Generally in his press conference he was very pleasant, very happy to be there, but quite concise with his answers. I wouldn't say he was in the industry would say greatest talker, someone who really elaborates and gives you really interesting quotes. I wouldn't say he fitted into that mould, but he did give the little insights. But yeah, he said there was no particular secret. He just works hard, I guess. Obviously he's known for his celebrations, referring to his love of anime, Japanese anime cartoons. He hadn't thought of one yet for England if he does score, but if he does, he'll surely come up with something which we want to look out for. He said when coming to Spurs, it wasn't the fact that they were in Europe that was the big draw from him. He just saw them as a top club, the next step. And he was also asked about James Maddison, who obviously has missed out on the squad. Must be frustrated after some fine form recently. But I guess when you look at England's options, they've just got so many great players in that number 10 position. Cole Palmer. I was asking Noni Madueke yesterday if he was the best player in the world right now. So that shows you how good he is. And obviously there's Bellingham and Foden. So it's a tough ask for Maddison. Solanke said, he was disappointed. He understandably disappointed to miss out, but like Solanke, Maddison's going to use it as motivation to try and get back in, which can only be good news for Tottenham going forward. And then he was finally asked about Harry Kane. He was asked about players, he sort of might model his game on. He said there wasn't anyone in particular, but Kane is someone that he has looked at. It's obvious really when you look at the way they play. Obviously Solanke's more of a athletic kind of pressing forward, but as we saw in that Brighton game, the way he dropped deep, that was quite Kane-esque really, with the way he would take up those sort of number 10 positions. And he also talks about Harry, because obviously Harry's the one who's been the number one striker for England for so long and will continue to be, you'd imagine, for the next few years. He said he described him as a once in a lifetime striker, which is a really nice quote. But that doesn't mean that the players behind him, who are effectively sort of jostling to play second fiddle to Kane, and obviously Watkins is in this squad as well with Solanke in that role. doesn't mean that they can't step up when given the option. And actually, Solanke, you think with Greece would have a good chance of getting some minutes. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Watkins who starts, but Kane picked up a knock against Frankfurt for Bayern Munich on Sunday. On Tuesday, he was was having an individualised training indoors. So you'd think he was a doubt for the Greece game on Thursday. So that would open the door for Solanke. We'll have to see. And yeah, just moving on to Simon Francis's comments, as I mentioned. He obviously was captain when Solanke first signed and moved on to being technical director now. He's someone that I've interviewed quite a lot over the years. During lockdown, I did a ghostwriter column for Simon when there was no football, about his experiences of what he was getting up to, trying to stay fit. A really good guy, and and the fact that he wanted to do this about Solanke sort of just speaks to how liked Solanke is generally around by his teammates. Not everyone. If you ask, certain people to sort of talk about other players, they might. Well, sometimes they can't. They haven't got the time, but sometimes they can't be bothered because they don't really want to talk up players that maybe they got on well with and maybe they got on well with on the pitch, but weren't massively enamoured with off the pitch. But Solanke, clearly, you could tell how much Francis sort of liked him and had appreciation for him. And he said that Dom was different to any other player that he'd ever played with, due to his mindset being exactly the same as it was when he first played with him, when he signed to the player that was sold for 65 million in the summer. He said he was a quiet guy, level-headed, never a problem, always looking to work and improve his game. Quite different to Callum Wilson, who was a mate of Francis's, but he would say with Callum, before he entered the room, you could hear him coming, like a big sort of gregarious character who, when it wasn't going well in front of goal, would make it sort of make it be known, put it that way. It sounds like he's a typical striker, perhaps, who I guess they can be quite selfish, and that's not a bad thing at all. But Solanke, the complete opposite, not one to get down when in fact he wasn't scoring for Bournemouth, which went on for a long time. He didn't get too down over that, and just sort of branded him like sort of a team player and a better player really than Wilson and Josh King. He thought all round. He said that Francis said that relegation, as sad and negative as it was to say from a sort of Bournemouth perspective, it's what basically Solanke needed, because it meant that Wilson moved on. Obviously went to Newcastle. Josh King eventually left. I think he went to Everton in the end, didn't he? Before. Which allowed Solanke to become the main man and allowed Bournemouth to build that team around him. He became he was known to be playing every week, no matter what, and that was the making of Solanke really, in building up his confidence, working on his game, scoring those goals obviously in the Championship, and with Iraola, he talked about, obviously by then Solanke was the established centre forward, but how Iraola has sort of played a slightly more direct, not direct sort of long ball game, but just getting the ball up the pitch a bit quicker, and that sort of played into Solanke's to his strengths, being in the right positions all the time. He talked about being constantly in and around the box, particularly from the pressing that Bournemouth implemented. That's where so many of his chances came from, and you can see exactly why he would fit Spurs on that front. He said that there was a game last season against Nottingham Forest where Solanke scored a hat-trick, including, I think, at least one header. That was the sort of moment, the sliding doors moment, Francis said, where he realised that Solanke could go on to play for a top club, because they've been working apparently on heading in the week. Tommy Elphick, a former Bournemouth defender who's now a coach at Bournemouth, had been working on the heading side of game for Solanke, which perhaps until then hadn't been a strong part of his game, and he was putting it into practice. So he had he had the pressing, he had the finishing with his feet, he had the heading, he had the link-up play, he had the pace, he had the energy, he had the all-round package really, and that's when, as I say, Francis realised that he could go on to play for a top club, which is what reason Spurs paid for all the money they did, and why Francis seems to be quite confident that he will go on to be a big success at Tottenham. Like to round it off, he just sort of talked about how Solanke wasn't he didn't, what's the word? He wasn't put off by his difficult journey to the top. You know, it only motivated him more, which is kind of what Solanke was saying. And just finally, just how pleased he was for him. So to reiterate the point, you could tell the sort of love and pride that that Francis had in Solanke's success and his journey to getting where a lot of where so many people hoped he would be finally nowadays with Spurs and in England. And that's something that I've heard a few times from people from that Bournemouth season when they got relegated. They're just happy that he's doing so well, which speaks to how liked he must be as a teammate and appreciated. So yeah, let's see how Solanke gets on. Fingers crossed he gets some minutes and gets his cap, maybe even gets a goal, and that can kick on and help him sort of push on for Spurs because Spurs are going to need him if they're going to do good things. Obviously, you know, that defeat against Brighton is hanging over Tottenham right now, and all the fans are sort of probably frustrated. I can even tell by the views. So my Mikey Moore video the other day that they're not particularly high. I guess people just don't really want to be listening to Tottenham and reading about them and watching about them right now. They just want a bit of space. But I think big picture, they've got some really good players, and if they can erase that horrendous second half performance and never do that again, they could be on to good things. So there is a bit of perspective needed. And with Solanke, I think he, you know, as proved by his England call-up already, I think he could really prove to be an absolutely massive signing. So let's see.